I am chagrined. I am shamed. I am caught out in an error, and I must explain. I must apologize. I must beg your forgiveness. I must make amends for having led you astray. A couple of weeks ago, in talking about the Charleston shooting, I said that Dylan Roof, the underfathered jackass who committed the murders, had complied with all of the ridiculous federal gun control laws. And in fact, he was in full compliance, but the federal government itself was not in compliance with its own laws. So I made a mistake. I said he had obtained his firearm having complied with all of the ridiculous rules, and in fact, the compliance was not complete because the federal government screwed up his background check, the mandatory background check that everyone is required to go through in order to purchase a firearm, and is much like the TSA, thousands standing around at the airport, is absolutely exceptional at hassling and interfering with the lawful pursuits of tax-paying citizens who intend no harm whatever to their neighbors and yet cannot stop a criminal no way, no how, no matter what. Your tax dollars at work. Government is a sinecure in Latin, without care, is a no-show, do-nothing job for lazy malcontents. They get paid for doing nothing, and you should be grateful for that, because if they ever took their job seriously, you would be dead almost immediately. Thankfully, they don't take their job seriously. They're lazy morons. But in consequence, 9 people in Charleston are dead because lazy morons couldn't stop a psycho from getting a gun. Big surprise, that. They can stop ordinary, decent people from doing ordinary, decent things, but they can't stop crazy people. Nobody can stop crazy people unless they're armed. And the federal government wants to make sure that you're not able to stop crazy people. 2 reasons for that, frankly. Number one, as long as you're disarmed, you'll keep clamoring for more and more and more government to protect you from all of the demons who haunt your nightmares. And number 2, if you're disarmed, you can't fight back against federal tyranny when it's expressed against you and your loved ones. And therefore, today, at the Church of Splendor, for the very first time in my life, I am coming out in favor of a gun control measure. My favorite kind of gun control? Disarm the feds. The Charleston shooting is a perfect example of how incompetent the government is to do anything. The murder of Katie Steinle in San Francisco is yet another example. First, they imported her murder, re-imported her murderer 6 times. The sheriff of San Francisco went out of his way to re-import that particular murderer to make sure he was around to kill Katie Steinle. And the gun he used to commit the murder was a federal gun. It was a gun owned by or in the control of a federal law enforcement officer who had lost it, a lost gun. This happens all the time anyway. If you search for guns left in bathrooms on Google, you will find report after report after report of law enforcement officials leaving their guns behind in the bathroom and someone else finding them. It happened just recently at the U.S. Capitol building, U.S. Capitol Police leaving guns in the bathrooms. There's a responsibility issue here. An ordinary gun owner has his skin in the game, for one thing. The gun cost him real money, and they're not cheap. And he's personally liable for anything that happens in consequence. The doctrine of sovereign immunity, there are all kinds of ways that we go out of our way to protect criminals when they happen to carry badges, and this is one perfect example, that an ordinary gun owner who let a gun slip out of his control and a murder happened in consequence would face serious, serious consequences, both in the coercive criminal courts, but also in the civil courts. Virtually none of that happens when things like this happen. So the question that you should ask is, which guns should you fear? The guns that I fear most are the ones that are in the hands of people who bear the least consequences for their errors. And that would mean the guns that are most dangerous in the United States are the guns that are held by federal law enforcement officials, federal agents of any stripe, people who work for the federal government who consider it necessary to go about armed because they know that sooner or later they will issue a diktat that will result in a bullet in their back, or 3 or 400. None so deserving. But the guns we should fear most are the ones that are in the control of the federal government, and therefore if we want to make the world safer from random gun violence, the thing to do is to disarm the feds. That if the federal government, nothing is going to change overnight. We're not going to be in an anarchy tomorrow. But if the federal government has some sort of law enforcement need that requires the use of weaponry, then they need to call upon local law enforcement to enforce their will. This has real advantages for ordinary people like you and me. Last week we talked about near versus far in systems of moral philosophy. The farther you are from yourself, the interests of yourself, your loved ones, your values, the farther you are from that, the less concern you have over your actions. The more likely you are to take actions that will have injurious future consequences, because those consequences are less likely to be visited upon you. Whereas the nearer you are to your values, the more likely you are to be careful. Where are you more likely to speed in your car, in your own neighborhood, or in somebody else's neighborhood? And that'll tell you how the whole world works if you think about it. The police who are least likely to engage in unwarranted violence against taxpayers are the police who live nearest to you, who see you all the time, whose kids go to school with your kids, whose wives are den mothers together in the Boy Scout troop. These are the police who are most likely to be trustworthy with the awesome and inappropriate power they have under our current system of government, and therefore they are the people who are safest. If we are going to have armed law enforcement, the people who are safest in the control of that kind of power are the ones who live nearest to you and have the most day-to-day contact with you in your real normal life. The ones who live farthest from you and have the least contact with you are the ones who are most dangerous. In the same way, the local police will be staying behind after the violence is over, whereas the federal law enforcement people will be here today and gone tomorrow, and therefore they don't have to live with the consequences of error. Obviously, the consequences of erroneous, forceful law enforcement should be visited upon the law enforcement officer who has committed a crime of violence against an innocent party. That should happen, but it won't. But other consequences of those kinds of egregious errors do endure, where people are stuck in one place and have to look at the survivors of their violence day upon day upon day, and that does not apply to the federal government. I will promise you that this will not happen. It is not going to happen. And you can take this movie every time some dumbass Marxist comes up with another gun control plan. You can take this movie, link to it, and say, see, if you want gun control, start at the top. Disarm the feds first. This is a perfectly logical argument, and therefore it will not do anything, because the people that you're debating with have no interest whatever in logic. They have no interest in consistency. They have no interest in justice. All they care about is power. They want gun control for the reasons that I named, to make you first the mewling victim of the state, and second, to take away your power to do anything to resist becoming the mewling victim of the state. That's what they want. That's the purpose of gun control. But you can throw this in their face. If you really cared about gun control, you'd disarm the feds. They are the most dangerous gun criminals in the United States. But it's not going to happen. Barack Obama will continue to campaign for gun control when it's to his advantage, as in Charleston, and never when it's to his disadvantage, as in San Francisco. The Pope in Rome will say that guns are the tools of the devil, and yet he will do nothing to disarm the Swiss guards who protect him. He will swear that commerce consists of the devil's dung dealers, but he won't stop buying that dung. Unfortunately, the dung dealers won't step up and say, we're tired of soiling the Pope, we will never soil the Pope again. In the same respect, all of the people who protect Barack Obama's life while he denounces guns won't leave their guns at home, or won't accidentally forget them in a bathroom somewhere. That won't happen. If you're looking for logic, if you're looking for consistency, wait until after the next Marxist collapse. But in the meantime, just keep it in the back of your mind that if you really care about gun safety, if you really care about preventing gun violence, if you really care about protecting people from unwarranted gun crimes, the very best thing you can do to assure your safety is to disarm the feds. Bless you. Thank you. Greg Swan, the Church of Splendor. I'll see you next week.